Hi everyone, this is Tom Levine, Cornerstone's tech guru, signing on to do this re-recording of the Excel 101 record. We had a lot of technical glitches and a few issues and a lot of questions and interruptions in the original recording. So I decided to just go ahead and re-record this so everyone gets the basics down. We're going to go through some sizing of cells, how to sort and filter your data, how to move and manipulate cells, some different formatting issues that you might encounter in Excel, and how to do general screen freeze pane issues, as well as covering all of what's going on up here in the ribbon, which I'm going to circle up here. The ribbon is a pretty common thing in all sorts of applications, but it's used across the entire range of the Microsoft Office things. So we're going to go ahead and get started on this one by going through all of the ways you can manipulate cells. So first off, I'm going to just say that in order to see that you have a cell selected, you just click on it, and then this black border will pop up around the cell. Currently, I have F2 selected. Another way that you can tell that is by looking at the gold selected area up here. This is column F, and row 2 are highlighted, so I know that I have F2 selected. If I have a range of cells selected, which I can get just by clicking here on the cell and dragging through, you can see the range very clearly that I have selected, not only by the gold popped up borders, but also by the blue area that I have selected. That tells me the entire range of data that I have selected that I'm ready to manipulate. But more generally, it refers to the cells, not their contents. That's saying that it's selecting and looking at area A2 to E6, not line, first, last, proper, and whatever fills the cells. If I wanted to increase the length, let's say, of cell C2, just as an example, I would click on this area between the borders here. My cursor, as you can see, will change to that icon with the two arrows on either side of a vertical line. I'm going to just extend it wide. Let's set it to 241 pixels. And then I let go. You can do the same thing to adjust the row height as well and increase that row height there. And that's how you would manipulate a single cell's length and height. If you're trying to do that to a wide range of data, you're going to have to do that first by selecting the entire range of data that you want to adjust. And you can adjust the entire length of several of them at the same time, but you can only do that based on the columns and rows you have selected. So if I wanted to adjust, say, all of the rows for A to G or columns and make them all the same size, I would select A to G. Then I would move the first selected cell in that range to width, let's say, 13.43, and then I would let go. That automatically adjusted all of these columns so they had the exact same width. I can do something similar with height as well. However, I have to make sure that I select all of the entire rows heights that I want to change. For instance, if I highlight rows 2 to 6 and then move row 2, then it changed rows 2 to 6, or to 11, I guess I selected, to exactly the same height. However, if I have the range A to E selected, and I do the same thing, it only changes the height in row 5. So just make sure that you have the correct range of data selected that you want to edit. Another thing you can do is you can set these automatically to be the full width or full length that you need to consolidate all the data. What I mean by that is I can adjust all of these so that you can see everything I have entered automatically. I do that by going up to the border of either the row height or the column height that I want after I've selected all my data. and I just double click on that border area. I clicked on the first one for cell A because I had the full range of data selected, but you could click on any of them twice and it would be fine. Just to show you that one more time, I go up here to the border between the columns and I double click, and that automatically adjusts the entire width of all of my lines. I can do the same thing to the height of all of the borders of the cells by double clicking on that border as well. I selected all of my data, by the way, by clicking on this little icon up here. That's in between the A label for the column and the 1 label for that row. Now that I have my full range of data selected, however, because I have all of this entered into cell A and I want to show you more data, I need to adjust row or column A. To do that, I just click off of this selection. I just select a random cell to do that, and I adjust column A, and that automatically adjusts it without doing anything to any of the other columns. Additionally, you can move columns and rows around. If I want to say move this first name over here in column B, I want to move that entire column in front of column C, then what I'll do is I will right click on B and hit cut. Then I will right click on the column directly to the right of where I want this to be inserted, and I'll just hit insert cut cells. And I'm going to show you that one more time just so you see it. I click on all of column B, then I right click, hit cut, and then insert cut cells. You can do the same thing to the rows as well to rearrange them. However, you're going to want to make sure that you put it directly below the row that you're trying to move to. For example, if I want to move line 1 here below line 4, I'm going to right click on line 1, hit cut, right click on line 5, because that's directly below line 4, and I want this to be below line 4, and I hit insert cut cells, and it moves my cut section down. You can also do the same thing with copy and paste. I'm gonna just show you real quick by copying all of row 6 and moving it back up above line 2. And I'm just gonna hit that insert copied cells line. As you can see, that moved a copy of one or column row 1 back up above row 2 as far as the line number is concerned. And then I'm just going to delete the duplicate. That covers most of cell manipulation. However, with regard to cutting and pasting, I will say you can do that to wide ranges as well, not just one column or one row. For example, for this section, I've selected D3, it looks like, to H12. I have that range selected, so I'm going to hit cut. As you can see, this dotted border popped up around that range, and that just shows that I have that entire range of area selected, and I have it selected and set to cut. If I wanted to move it all the way over here, I would just right click and hit insert cut cells. Then it'll give me this insert paste option. It'll tell me to shift cells to the right or shift cells down. If I click shift cells to the right and hit OK, you probably didn't see anything because I moved it at the end. But as you can see, we have cut our data from the range we selected and moved it to the end of our table. If I instead, say, wanted to move this in between carrier and this med column here, I would right click and hit insert cut cells. We had insert to the right selected, so it moved all of that range of data that was occupying the space that we selected to move this to the right. If I had clicked down, if I hit cut and insert it here and insert cut cells down this time, Let's try that one more time. And then select Shift Cells down. It moves the data that had previously occupied that area down. And I just hit Control Z to undo everything there. There is a limit to how many things you can undo with that, but that's the general undo shortcut across the entire range of the Microsoft Office suite. So once again, keyboard shortcut, very useful. The other thing we can do to our table of data here is we can change the arrangement of it. We can sort and filter things alphabetically based on the columns and based on the row data. What I need to do for that is I'm going to select the entire range of data that I want to sort. I just selected columns or rows 2 to 52 here because that's the length of my data. However, you could change that selection and only sort the selected area as well. Generally speaking, if I have a table like this, I make sure that this line section here, my headers, all line up to this first cell, A1, so that I can just select the full range of data by using that shortcut there. Then I'm going to hit the sort and filter option up above and hit custom sort. This opens up the sort menu, and if I hit my data has headers here, then it will automatically select all the data below my header. You select which columns you want to sort by using the drop downs down here. If I, for instance, click on this drop down now, and let's say I wanted to sort everything by the proper first name of our client, I would hit first because that's column B, and I want to sort by the data in the first name, and then I would hit OK. Before I do, however, I just want to show you the difference. If I unclick this My Data Has Headers selection, now instead of saying first, which is the name of our actual column that we have for our header, it says column B. If I leave this unchecked and just sort by column B, I'm going to hit OK to show you. Then it will sort all of my data based on what was in column B. It's also sorting that header there because I didn't click that I have headers option. If I hit Control Z to undo and reopen that menu and sort by column B again, but this time click My Data Has Headers and hit OK, then it didn't include that first area in the sort. That's generally how you would make sure that your headers don't get caught. The other thing you could do is add multiple layers of sorting and filtering. If I go back into this custom sort menu and hit add level, it adds a whole nother layer to this sort that I can do. When you're going through this, it sorts by the first layer down automatically. And then if you don't select anything else to sort by, it automatically sorts the other columns to that. But let's change this so we're sorting first by the name and then by the relationship column here. Just to show you the difference, I'm going to do the inverse of this next. And then I'm going to hit OK. What that's done now is that has sorted everything in alphabetical order by first, and then sorted everything one more time by the alphabetical order of whatever's in the relationship column. Just to show you the inverse of that, I'm going to select the data range again, go to custom sort one more time, and swap these. You can't drag and drop in this menu just to rearrange the order, so you do have to use that first menu. Let's go ahead and change this to first and this to relationship, and then sort my data one more time. As you can see, now it sorted all of my data by relationship type first, and then alphabetically by first name. So you see all the children, all the domestic partners, all the employees, etc. Another thing that you could do when sorting and filtering, or I guess another thing to remember, is this order section up here. If I click on the drop-down, it gives me a lot of different options. Currently, the data we have selected is mostly text, so it's automatically giving this A to Z, Z to A option. This is pretty straightforward. It organizes things alphabetically from A to Z or from Z to A based on that column. For instance, if I do Z to A in relationship and then first name A to Z and hit OK, I have the inverse of my relationship sort. All the spouses are up top, the childs are down below, but they're all still sorted alphabetically by first name A to Z. You can do this with numbers as well. For instance, if I select the range rate per payment down here to the end of column Z and open my sort and filter menu, it still gives me that data has headers option, but because I have a different selection, it's reset all of these. So because I'm only looking at columns N to Z in my data range, it basically reset the sort. If I sort by something that is all values, something like rate per payment, then this order section here changed. It went from smallest to largest and largest to smallest. That's just something to be aware of when you're going through your sort. It generally tells you how it's going to sort it, and you can click through these options to see all of the different ones. This middle section here gives you other different things to sort by. I automatically leave it at values, and I'd recommend you leave it at values, but you can also sort by cell color, font color, and your cell icons here as well. Lastly, you can actually do cell formatting and freeze panes. Those are the last two cell manipulation sections I'm going to cover, and then we're going to get more into the ribbon up above. But in order to do your cell formatting, you're going to need to look up here in the Home tab. As you can see right here, this box in the middle in the number section shows your format. Your format's very important, and you won't be able to manipulate data accurately moving on unless you make sure that everything is set to general typically, with the exception of dates. If I highlight my date column, because I have some of these formatted differently, and change those to general formatting, as you can see, some of these dates that I have listed have changed to numbers. Look at cell H37 as an example. I'm going to turn that yellow here just so you can see it a little bit better. The reason this changed to a solid number and not a date format is because this was entered as a general number. You can see that in the formula bar up here. If I click on H36, however, I see that it is manually typed in text 5/15/1956. If I change this back to date, short date is what I prefer to use, then it automatically reformatted those to be all date text. The reason it does this is because Excel stores dates themselves solidly as just a string of numbers. It counts up from a start date, I think it's January 1st of like 1990, and just counts forward. So anything that you enter is just a normal date. For instance, if I type in this cell, 1/1/2020, and hit enter, it automatically has this formatted as date. However, if I change it back to general, as you can see, it's stored it as number. I've done something a little bit trickier, which I'm going to show in the next webinar, to make some of these dates just solid text. But as you can see, your formatting up here matters quite a bit. The only thing I would normally change in this, you can change it to have general accounting formats, percentage formats, where your comma styles are, etc. I prefer, if I'm just setting up a data table, to use general, and that's what I'd highly recommend. It automatically formats pretty much everything to look the way you want to look, besides things like dates. So I would just make sure before you really start working in anything to make sure that that number format for all of your columns and rows, and you can just select them all there, is set to general. Additionally, you can freeze different panes in order to look through your data a little bit easier. That's in the View tab up here, which we're going to cover more in depth in a minute. But if I click on that View section and look under the window options here, I have this option right here called Freeze Panes, and I have my cursor over it right now. What Freeze Panes does is it allows you to keep some parts of the sheet visible while the rest of the sheet scrolls. For example, if I wanted to make sure I could see all of my header information always, I could just have the sheet I'm looking at selected, go to Freeze Panes, and select Freeze Top Row. And now I can scroll down and my top row stays frozen. I can also scroll to the left and right, easy enough. Let's say I also wanted to freeze column A. I'm going to go to Freeze Panes. I'm going to hit Freeze First Column. As you can see, however, my line 1 got reset. But I can scroll to the right, scroll to the left, still see my line number. If you wanted to do both of these at once, you would actually click right here on the cell just outside of the range that you want to freeze. Just to show you a bit better, I'm going to unfreeze all my panes real quick. All I did is select that Freeze Panes option and hit the top option because I had a pane frozen. That was unfreeze. And then I'm going to click Freeze Panes. So now it's frozen all of row 1 and all of column A. I can scroll down. I can scroll to the right. And both of those stay the same. So that's how you would freeze multiple pane selections. Just to show you something a bit more, I'm going to freeze columns 1 and 2, or columns A and B, and row 1 and 2. I do that by clicking on cell C3, going to Freeze Panes, and hitting Freeze Panes once more. Now I can scroll down and to the right. Easy enough. That kind of generally covers how to manipulate cells in general. We're going to be covering a lot of what you can put into these cells in our next webinar. So please stay tuned and make sure you watch that one coming up. So I'm going to unfreeze these panes. And now we're going to cover most of the ribbon section up here. A lot of this is kind of a repeat from the Microsoft Word option. Things like the font selection options and alignment selection options affect text in exactly the same way if you tuned into our Word webinar. Let's go ahead and automatically change some of these texts. I'm going to change the font to, let's say, Arial. And now I can change the font size as well. Same way. I'm going to Control Z to make sure I undo all of that. And then I'm going to show you a little bit more of how to select a specific range. Like I said before during cell manipulation, the range you select is highlighted by this blue area here. So if I want to only affect these cells, I just highlight that range. If I want to affect the whole data table, however, I click that little corner up there and it selects everything. For instance, if I want to change just the font of this, I can do that very quickly just by selecting specifically those cells and changing our font selection. You can also bold, italicize, underline, fill cells, and change the cell font color using these sections in here. You have the same quick selections for font size. And the only real difference that I want to mention is this borders section up here in the font. In Microsoft Word, if you use this border setting, it sets the border for the entire row of text that you're inputting. In Excel, it selects the borders for the entire range you have selected. So I currently have selected cells D2 to G7, and I'm going to make sure that all of these have a top border. If I click off of the range now, as you can see, the entire range of what I had selected now has a top border. That doesn't fill in these internal areas here. If I had select all borders, however, that selects the entire range of borders and adds them in. If I just wanted maybe the left border or the right border to appear on this cell selection range, just highlight that range and click them as I want them to appear. For example, if I'm going to reset my borders here to show you one more time, and then select left border, now my range has a left border. If I do right, now it has a right border. It's thinking about this as far as the range is outside borders. So that's what this border thing is really editing. You can do it real quick by selecting all outside borders as well, or all borders. If you want to get really into the border options, then you can click More Borders, and this gives you the full border selection menu. You can change the options for the range by using these buttons over here to quickly change them. But that's how you get to all of the inside border options. And then I'm going to hit OK. And that added all of the inside borders to my cell range. Typically, if you're working with a single data table on a single worksheet, however, you're going to want to highlight the entire selection and just hit all borders. That's pretty easy and applies all of the borders to everything. The only reason I'm mentioning these borders is because if I have no borders selected, currently you see all these gray borders around each of the cells. The reason for this is because it's just showing you the visual separation of each of the cells. This is a default option, and it just automatically shows the cell separations. If I wanted to, however, change it so these grid lines disappeared, I would go to View, Show, and click on that grid lines option. Now, as you can see, I don't even have any of the cell borders showing. This is what it would look like if you just printed it out without any of those borders thrown in. If I highlight some of my header there, though, and hit all borders, now that border's popping up. So just something to keep in mind before you try to print out an Excel sheet is that grid lines do not equal the borders that actually print. In addition, under this Home tab here, you might want to also change your alignment. This alignment here refers to the text that's inside of the cell. If I select range A1 to G8 and hit this right button here, that aligns all of the text to the far right of the cell. Mid aligns things to the middle, and left aligns things to the left. This bottom row here indicates how to align your text based on the borders of the rows. This one up here aligns based on the columns. So if I click the top align here and widen these cells a bit, just so you can see it a bit more, let's widen 2, 3, and 5, just so you can see. I'm going to select the bottom. It aligns my text to the bottom of the cell, middle to the middle, and left to the left. You can also wrap text and do orientation changes here as well. Wrap text just shows that if I, let's say, narrow column D down here, it'll wrap the text around in the box, so it condenses your data a little bit more. If I turn it off, then that data stops wrapping when I narrow the column, and the entire line of text just goes on straight until it hits something. I'm going to readjust my heights and lengths of everything here before I move forward. You'll also see this merge and center button, however, in the alignment section. I personally don't like to use it, but it's a way of merging the cells so you can have like a wide title over a section. For example, instead of if I wanted each of these labeled individually, I wanted to clear out the data there. I just select the range, hit the delete button on my keyboard to clear out the range of cells. Then I'm going to hit merge and center. Now it treats all of these cells here, R to Z, as one common cell with all the other cells underneath. And I'm just going to type miscellaneous data. Up there, and then align text to the left and middle. So that's how you would merge cells. You can also unmerge cells in a similar way. If I highlight the entire selected range, set it to all middle, and hit that merge and center button again, it unmerged those cells and added this misc data thing all the way in the first cell that I had merged, which is R. I don't really like it because it makes it harder to adjust your worksheets if you're trying to add formulas and fully manipulate data or process a spreadsheet. But it's really useful if you're trying to display data. So my recommendation if you're going to merge cells is to fully edit all of the data that you want first, make sure that it's fully split up, fully arranged, fully correct, and then merge your cells to apply your formatting. Additionally, in this home screen, you have this number section here, which we covered a little bit earlier, that shows the cell type. You have all of these types here. Personally, I'd leave it in general, but you can also format things as dates, percentages, fractions, scientifically notated things, but we're going to get a little bit more into that into the next webinar. For now, it's enough to know that this is how you would change all of the different cell settings, but we're going to leave it on general. The styles here, I'm going to skip as well because it gets into some of the other things with conditional formatting. But we will cover it probably in the third webinar in the series. This cells option here just gives you press button options to delete and insert cells, as well as automatically format the row heights. But this lets you do it more through a menu. For instance, if I click on that format and row height, I just get a separate box menu for row height instead of doing the drag and drop manipulation option that I used earlier. Then you have this editing tab over here. That's where we found the sort and filter options and the find and select options. The one thing that I'd really note from here, other than sort and filter, however, is AutoSum. This is the shortcut to access quick built-in functions in Excel. For instance, if I wanted to add all of the numbers in row O, I could click on the row at the bottom, click on that drop down, and hit sum. It automatically selects the entire range of data that it sees. And then if I hit enter, it automatically sums that range. I'm going to click on that formula again just to show you where it pops up. This bar up here under the ribbon is called the function bar, and it's where everything that's physically inside of the cell will show up. As you can see, I currently have selected O2 to O51. That is represented by the blue section up here. If I hit enter, it automatically sums that up. That's just how you can easily view the range you're adding. If I wanted to change that range of cells, however, I could drag and drop the box from like O2 to P51 instead of O51, let go and hit enter, and it'll instead add all of the contents of all of this range. For now, let's move this back over. But that's not the only quick function you have access to, and it doesn't only do that for the rows. It will also do that automatically for columns. It just detects all the numbers until it sees text. If I hit enter, it sums range N2 to P2 as well there. So don't feel like you just have to use your sums based on columns. There are other options here as well. There's average, count numbers, minimum, and maximum. Average, minimum, and maximum do exactly what you would think. However, count numbers is a little bit tricky. If I hit count numbers, currently I have cell 060 selected and hit enter. It tells me that there are 50 cells containing numbers in that range. If I do that instead to this text box option up here, clicked on M52, my functions, and hit count numbers, it doesn't automatically fill because it doesn't detect any numbers in the range. However, I can just click and drag to select that range of data that I want to manipulate, hit enter, and it spits out a 0. What that does is that shows me that there are 0 cells in that range that have data in them. That's a number format. So I'm going to delete that as well. That covers the Home tab in general. That's the tab that you'll be using most frequently. A lot of these have sections that you probably won't use, and because this is a basic section, I'm going to skip over some of the things that you wouldn't, but we're going to cover some of the other important options up in here. Important to mention in the Insert section of the ribbon is this pivot table option. We're going to be covering that in the Excel 201 webinar more in depth, but basically pivot tables allow you to automatically summarize a range of data you have selected. We also have this table selection here, which formats a data set as a table. It's very similar to the pivot table, except that it gives you more control over things. I don't recommend beginner users use this table function because I think you'll find pivot table a little easier if you're trying to arrange a table. Additionally, you'll probably want to look at some of these charting options in here if you're using the Insert tab. But basically, the Insert tab is just set up around inserting things. For instance, if I wanted to insert a pie chart based on data, I'd click on pie there. But often enough, pivot table is going to be a better use for you than this chart section. The only other thing I'd mention here is this text box. This allows you to just insert a box over your data or wherever you want on the sheet just by clicking that selection, dragging, and letting go with your left cursor or your left button on your mouse. What that does is it allows us to add descriptions to our charts without really affecting the overall data. I use this if I'm typing up long audits and I just want to make notes on the margins. For instance, I could type this is an example in this text box and click off. And now I have this text box here covering up this data that says this is an example. I can move the text box around by clicking on the borders in the upper section here. It'll also work if you click on just the right. But if you click on these little points here that are a little bit better illustrated, that changes the size of the text box that you're moving around as well. If I move this down here, this is an example. As you can see, it's possible for the text box to cut off some of the text. However, if I want to remove a text box, I right click, and as you can see, I don't see a delete option. That's just generally one of the quirks about text boxes. If I hit this format section up here, I get the entire format of the text box. And if I right click here again, it still thinks I'm in text. If I select this option up here, that's how I can rotate my text box. I can rotate it around as you see. But if I really want to delete the shape, I select the text but not what's inside, and I hit delete on my keyboard. I'm just gonna do that one more time real quick just to make sure everyone got that. If I'm in the Insert tab and insert a text box, I can move it around with all of these vertices here. I can increase the height. I can even rotate it. But if I want to delete a text box, I make sure my cursor isn't inside By clicking on that border a few times, this little multi-directional arrow will pop up to show you that you have the entire box selected. And then I just hit delete, and it deletes the text box. Some other things to mention are these page layout section. This isn't really used very often, but you can use it to adjust the overall feel of your document. With the themes drop down here, it automatically sets things like font color, the orientation of cells, and things like that. So if you're trying to make something a little bit jazzier, you can scroll through these themes. The only other thing that you'll probably be looking at in this page layout section is the orientation and the margins. This is part of the print settings. So if you want things to print in a landscape, it doesn't actually change the overall look or feel of the worksheet. It just makes sure that Excel knows that when it prints, to print this in a landscape format or portrait. And that changes it to up and down on your screen. To the right of column G, we see this dotted line that's popped up once I change the orientation. What that's showing is the actual cutoff on the page where it's going to print. So as you can see here, it's kind of cutting my table in half. If I wanted to change that, I would just change the orientation to landscape and look for my new dotted lines. I still can't really fit all of this data on one page is what this is saying. And a lot of people tend to run into this issue. What I do if I need to change this are two things. The first is I can change the width of my cells specifically. That will cut off some of my data, however, and some of the actual contents of the cells when I print. That's not really great if you're trying to show everyone something in a presentation. So if you wanted to make sure everything still fit, you could go back into Home and change the font sizes here to something smaller. That'll try to help things fit a little better on your printed page. If we go back into page layout, you can also add breaks down here, which will specify when a new page will begin when you're printing. If I insert a page break, for example, because I had cell H5 selected, it automatically split up the pages from G back because I had cell H selected, and from cells 4 and up because I had row 5 selected. If I wanted to change the print area out here and do the same thing, it inserts another page break there. But if I wanted to undo it, I'm going to hold Control Z. I can undo that very easily with that Control Z function. If I wanted to change the print area and remove it outside of that, however, I could go to Breaks, insert page break, and then just remove page break there. And that'll automatically remove that page break when you print. Other than that, there's not much here in the page layout that I think most people use other than viewing grid lines and viewing your header sheet options. If I go into formulas here, this is something that we're also going to cover in the next webinar more in depth, but you have this auto sum option that you had on the home screen as well. And that's what I basically go in here to use. It also has a bunch of other functions that are built in here as well. And it has this insert function wizard option here. All of these are things that we're going to cover more in Excel 201. If I select the data section up here, I can group, subtotal, ungroup data, just get a quick look and overview of what I've got. In order to do that, I'm going to select the entire length and select group, rows, and it automatically groups things based on what's going on here in the rows. I don't have any obvious data breaks, so it didn't insert anything here for my grouping. If I hit Control Z, I can undo it, or I could just go to ungroup up here, clear outline, and that would clear my grouping. Subtotals does a similar thing to grouping and ungrouping. It just gives the entire total of all of your groups of data as well. It's not a tool I find particularly useful, but if you just want to get general overviews of data, it's probably the easiest bet. Another thing that you can get from this data section up here is this text to column function. This is a pretty important one, so I'm going to cover in a bit of depth. If I insert a row here, I got to there by right-clicking on the entire length of column E, and then hitting insert. It just inserts that blank row in column E. Then we're going to split this data up here. I want to get columns for first names and columns for last name again from this length of data. In order to do that, I select the column I want to split up, and then I'm going to hit text columns. Here it opens the text columns wizard, and I can do delimited, which splits things based on individual characters in the text lines, or I can choose to split it off of a fixed width, which is exact widths of data in columns. That, in my mind, is the most difficult to understand. So we're going to start with splitting things based on a fixed width, and then go back and cover delimited. When you hit next, after you choose fixed width, then you can just click to manually insert a page break. I'm going to split it off of proper forward here. So I click that option there. It gives you instructions on how to add and remove lines as well if you ever forget, right up above here in this step 2 section, right there. But if I ever wanted to move it, I could just click and drag. If I wanted to insert another one, I would just click to add it. And if I wanted to remove that division, I just double click on the line. We have our data selected that we're going to split up. So I'm going to hit next. And this is where you can adjust the general types of data that you're putting in each separate column. You can do that with the options listed here, and it'll give you little drop downs and more things in this advanced setting option up here for changing like decimal separator, thousand separators, things like that, for anything formatted as a number. The current range of text that I have selected is all text, so it's telling me that it can only put things in general and general format. But if I wanted to change the type of a column, I would use this drop down over here. Well, these selections. I currently have the column I'm putting data into selected. You can tell that by the black box. And I hit text, and that changes all of this to a text format. Date does date formats, etc., etc. I'm going to leave it in general for now, but we're going to get more into this in the next webinar as well when we cover data types. Then I'm going to click Finish. You can also, if you don't want to get that specific with things, just hit Finish from this Step 2 screen, and that'll split things up automatically into a general format. It'll then pop up this notification here if it detects anything in that next column that you would be covering over. Because I have the entire length of D selected, there might be something farther down on the page that's causing this to pop up. I'm going to hit OK because I want to replace the contents of the cells. And now it's split up this column based on that line that I drew. If I hit Control Z to undo it, we're going to split it up delimited this time. So I go to text to columns and delimited. Here you get something a little bit different. Instead of having a ruler that you can manually click through to separate data, you have these options down here. I have tab, semicolon, comma, etc. I also have other here. If I click comma, it separates all my data based on commas. And I have tab selected up here, so it'll split it off of that as well. If I unclick tab, and just select comma, it does that too. I'm also going to add another column split in here and say whenever it sees, let's say, a J, an uppercase J, then it allows any uppercase J to get split out as well. The one thing I will say about this method, however, is that whatever you're sorting through or using to split up will get deleted. For instance, see when I clicked comma, all the columns disappeared. When I added the capital J, that J in Janet and Jane disappeared as well. I'm going to go ahead and leave it like this so you can see some data getting overwritten, but I'm going to hit next and then finish. It'll prompt me to replace the contents of destination cells again. I'm going to hit OK. As you can see, it split things into 4 separate cells. And even if I didn't have data to fill those cells or the columns, it automatically overwrote them. That's just something you need to be aware of when you're splitting up data. I'm going to hit Control Z again, and then delete to delete that extra column. The thing to know about text to columns is that you cannot do it the other way around. For instance, you can't add rows based on what you have as a long string of text in one cell. We also have the review section in here. This allows you quick access to workbook protection options, similar to those I used in Word. If I hit the view option up here, it lets me view different ways of viewing the page. It has those freeze pane options up over here that I had selected. But then it also has normal, which is the default view you should have, and page break view. Page break view gives you more of an overall view of how your pages will break apart if you want to print them. I'm going to hit OK on the dialog, and then I'm just going to go back to normal there. And that's how you get out of a page break preview. You could also view it based on the page layout, and that shows you the page breaks in a more exact printed format as well. You can also change the option to full screen using this selection here, and that just hides the entirety of the ribbon. If I hit Control Z, I don't actually undo it there either. The reason is because we entirely have our ribbon hidden now. I'm going to right-click here and close full screen. And that removes my full screen setting. The last tab that we have to go through is the developer tab, and that's automatically included, but it's not something I'd recommend any basic user using. It gives you access to full automation of things like macros and all of that stuff that'll really speed up your processing of things like statements. But on the other side, it's very exact and very finicky. Unless you know the code for it, I wouldn't even recommend touching the developer section. That's a general overview of all the different things you can do in Excel for general data manipulation and general data entry. So we're going to be having another webinar coming up for Excel 201 on 225. If you have any questions, please send me an email at tlevine@crnstone.com, and I'll be more than happy to answer any of them. You can also call into Cornerstone, ask to be forwarded to me, and they'll forward you there as well. I hope this has been a little bit more informative than the original webinar. And if you have any other questions, comments, or concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out. Have a wonderful day.